everybody. This is Craig Santiago here, the Assistant Branch Manager of the Lansdowne Road Branch Library. And today we're going to be doing some excerpts on All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. So there's a few things I want to share about this book. It's a groundbreaking young adult memoir by prominent author George M. Johnson, and he shares both glorious and gut-wrenching memories of growing up Black and queer in America. This first part is the introduction, and it's entitled Black, Queer, Here. The story of how I entered the world was a foreshadowing. When my aunt first saw my head full of beautiful jet black curly hair crowned from my mother's womb, she ran into the hospital's hallway where my family waited. "It's a girl, it's a girl," she yelled, to my grandmother's excitement and to my father's slight disappointment. But by the time my aunt got back to the delivery room and I had been fully born, she realized her quick assumption would soon need correcting. She ran back out to the family and said, actually, it's a boy. The "it's a girl, no, it's a boy" mix-up, it's funny on paper, but not quite so hilarious in real life, especially when the star of that story struggles with their identity. Gender is one of the biggest projections placed onto children at birth, despite families having no idea how the baby will turn out. In our society, a person's sex is based on their genitalia. That decision is then used to assume a person's gender as a boy or girl, rather than a spectrum of identities that the child should be determining for themselves. Nowadays, we are assigning gender even before birth. We have become socially conditioned to participate in the gendering of children at the earliest possible moment, whenever a sonogram can identify its genitalia. Gender reveal parties have become a trendy way to celebrate a child's fate, steering them down a life of masculine or feminine ideals before ever meeting them. It's as if the more visible LGBTQIAP+ people become, the harder the heterosexual community attempts to apply new norms. I think the majority fear becoming the minority, and so they will do anything and everything to protect their power. That's part of the introduction. Next, we're going to chapter 2 called Identity, which matches up with the introduction that George just mentioned. This is his grandmother starting this off. "Matthew, Matthew," Nanny was yelling for me. "What?" "Don't you what me, boy." I ran downstairs and stood in front of the big chair in the living room where Nanny sat and said, "Yes, Nanny?" "Go upstairs and grab my purse from behind the door." "Okay," I said, and again I went running. I was always Nanny's go-to for retrieving something. You know, go for this or go for that. I actually enjoyed being her helper, though. She would often make you come from upstairs to where she was downstairs, only to send you back upstairs to where you just left, so you get what she needed and come back to her. Nanny was old school. She liked to make sure she saw you before giving you instructions. The towering yellow house on Lansdowne Terrace in Plainfield was my second home. We used to call it the big house in comparison to my parents' home, which is much smaller. This was Nanny's house and our daily refuge after a long, rigorous day of elementary school. With my parents working, my brother and I would stay there after school every day from about 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. My mom would then come and pick us up after her time at the salon and bring us home. The big house was always fun because my cousins, Raul and Rasul, lived there, as well as my Aunt Munch when not in college. When I was a kid, Nanny's house also felt like home. There were plenty of times Friday would come and my mother would ask if we wanted to come home or stay the weekend. My younger brother and I always opted to stay for the weekend, which I'm sure our mother appreciated since she always worked at her salon on Saturdays. The big house also meant family. There was a big dining room table there, and Nanny loved cooking on Sundays and having all the elders, Mom, and Nanny's side of the family over for dinner to watch football on the big screen TV in the living room. Continuing on, there's some parts in here I want to get to as well. I recall one particular Sunday evening, though, when me and my cousin Little Rawl were teasing each other playfully, like we always did. The jokes started off very mild. That's why you short. That's why you ugly. Everyone's letting it happen because it seemed harmless enough at first. No one ever got the feeling that their feelings were hurt. But that all changed very quickly when I made a joke about his grades. That's why you get bad grades, I'd say. This pissed him off all the way. Luckily for me, Little Rawl was always my protector, so I didn't have to worry much about him ever retaliating violently. Had this been Rasul, the result would have been different for sure. But Little Rawl, instead of hitting me physically, went below the belt and hit me in the worst possible way, with the truth that most of my family were not ready for me to learn, whatever the reasons. That's why your real name is George, or is George. I stood there shocked at the statement. First, because I thought, what a stupid comeback. Second, because I knew that wasn't true. So I said to him, no, it's not. To which he responded, yes, it is. Your name is George, not Matthew. What is all this noise? Nanny said. I looked at her and said, Little Rawl keeps saying that my name is George, that my name isn't Matthew. I'm going to beat your ass when everyone goes home. Luckily for Little Rawl, she could never see how upset I was and opted to deal with him later. Come into the living room, Matt, and let's talk. I sat on the couch with Nanny and she explained that Little Rawl was correct, that my real name was George. I just remember sitting there and pondering what that meant. Like, did that mean I was supposed to be a different person? Was some mistake made when I was born? Did everyone else in the family go by fake names too? I was devastated by the news. It felt like my whole reality had been shattered and that I could not process what it all meant. I asked a bunch of questions, starting with, why don't you all use my real name? 1 second. Let's go back to the hospital where I was born. My parents and grandmother were gathered around as they made the decision about what I would be named. At the time, my father was insistent upon all his sons' names starting with a G. My older brother was already a junior, named Gregory Gerard Johnson Jr., after my dad. So, my dad, in all his creativity, thought my name should be Gerard Gregory Johnson. Did I mention my father was country? You'll understand why later. Thankfully, my mother and Nanny gave him an emphatic try again. So then my father decided that I would follow in the line of his father and brother and be named George. My grandfather's name was George Washington Johnson. It's okay to laugh, as I did when I first heard it as a child. And my father's brother named George Stevenson Johnson. And it's okay to laugh at his name too. The second attempt at my name was to make a junior under his brother, George Stevenson Johnson Jr., since my uncle had 3 daughters. For this idea, my mother and Nanny gave him another try again. Anyone who knows my father knows he is the king of this castle and wants things his way. So when it was all said and done, they compromised. He could pick my first name as long as Nanny and my mother could pick the middle one. Skipping a little bit further into the chapter, my name has been George to some and Matthew to others since that time. And although I think this is a funnier story in the lexicon of what has been in my interesting life, I feel there's a deeper meaning here. This story isn't about my name. It isn't about the shock of the 8-year-old who felt some cruel trick was being played on him, or the 13-year-old who would have to accept using his first name. This is about identity. This is about culture and how it dictates what is a good and bad name, especially in the Black community. This is about the politics around sex and gender, and that when our parents choose a name that we as children are uncomfortable with, we have the right to change it. Let's jump into the last part of this chapter. Your name is one of the most important pieces of your identity. It is a thing that you own. It is attached to every piece of work that you put into the world. Your name holds power when you walk into a room. No 2 people with the same name are the same person. It's important that, like everything else you grow into love in life, your name is something you appreciate as well. Should you not like your name? Change it. It is yours, and it will stay with you forever. So do with that what you wish. As we continue to grow through sex and gender, many people will take back their power and change their names, choosing one that fits the person they are, not the society pushed them to be. Keep your name if you like it, but know that you don't have to. The most important thing to realize is that you have the agency to make decisions that are in your best interest, the power to push back against society and even those in your own home. It is unfortunate that we live in a world where owning your agency could be met with rejection, disrespect, or even violence, especially for those owning their queer identity from a young age. Suffice it to say, respect people for their names and for how they choose to identify. This also goes for respecting people and their choice of pronouns: he, him, she, her, they, them, God, goddess, or whatever. We are conditioned to think these things should be the exception. People being allowed to call themselves by their chosen names and their gender pronouns is the rule. Let yourself unlearn everything you knew about yourself and listen to what you need to know about those who navigate life outside the margins of a heterosexual box. I bet most of you never thought to ever question if you ever even like your name, or question if that was something you had the power to change if you didn't. I hope you will now. That's the end of chapter 2 of All Boys Aren't Blue. I hope that you all decide to pick up this book and find out what happens the rest of his story. It's a powerful one to read. Thank you.